Mr. President, we voted in favor of the Gaza resolution and appreciate Jordan's consultative approach. The edits made to the text yesterday, acknowledging the 7th October terrorist attacks and the hostages taken by Hamas, and reaffirming the two-state solution, met our minimum expectations. Our favorable vote aimed to address the emergency humanitarian needs of Palestinians in Gaza. However, the resolution did not go far enough in being clear about the terrorist attacks by Hamas that have launched us on this disastrous course. For that reason, we co-sponsored and voted in favor of the Canada amendment for its explicit condemnation of Hamas terrorism and hostage-taking. With the world watching, once again, the General Assembly has taken action while the Security Council struggles to address threats to international peace and security. Each veto that contradicts the objective realities on the ground underscores the urgent need for Security Council reform. Without significant reform, the credibility and legitimacy of the Council, as viewed by the global populace, will continue to diminish. Mr. President, at the start of this debate, we listened closely to the representatives of Israel and Palestine. We were dismayed by their lack of empathy for each other's innocent civilian casualties. This entrenched partiality, this failure to recognize the shared humanity on both sides, is a fundamental obstacle to resolving this protracted conflict. On the 7th of October, Hamas terrorists infiltrated 22 Israeli locations using land, sea, and air routes, launching thousands of rockets at civilian areas. They killed over 1,400 people, injured almost 5,000, and took 200 hostages. Our deepest condolences go out to the affected families and communities in Israel. Almost every speech from this podium references international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention. While agreeing on the importance of universal adherence, it is crucial to emphasize that international and natural law fundamentally protect the unequivocal right to self-defense. This is particularly pertinent in light of Hamas's actions on the 7th of October, which mirror its original 1988 Charter's objective of eradicating Israel and its Jewish population. The attack suggests that even the supposedly moderated 2017 Charter revision, which maintained that, and I quote, "resisting the occupation with all means and methods is a legitimate right," close quote, still harbors intentions to destroy Israel and its Jewish people. The hate-fueled 7th October attack is abominable, and its underlying genocidal intent is fundamentally inhumane. It is vital for factions in Palestine, the region, and the international community to unequivocally reject such heinous strategies. Today, Kenya condemns Hamas for their attack and demands the immediate release of all hostages and the cessation of its use of civilians as human shields. Mindful of multiple Security Council resolutions, Kenya calls on all member states to intensify their efforts to suppress the financing of groups that employ terrorism. Like Israel after the 7th of October, Kenya knows the bitter aftermath of terrorist attacks only too well. We have endured the psychological torture of hearing the perpetrators attempt to justify the unjustifiable and to blame the victims who are our children, parents, and siblings. We have experienced the searing anger and yearning for justice against those who intentionally harm our loved ones. We reject terrorism as a legitimate form of political resistance. We recognize the need to name and shame those who use terror to promote any cause. Mr. President, this many decades later, we are still recovering from the wounds of colonial rule and the deep scars of the slave trade. We will never forget the decades we willingly endured immense suffering, including massacres and even concentration camps, in our unyielding pursuit of independence and sovereignty. We can therefore relate to the raw feelings of anger and pain being felt by the people of Palestine for the lack of progress in negotiations to achieve the two-state solution. We also pay heed to the immense suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians. The lives of Palestinian people are as precious as those of all other peoples. Thousands of Palestinian civilians, including hundreds of children, have been killed by Israel's air barrage against Hamas. Critical civilian infrastructure is being destroyed. UN agencies on the ground are warning of a calamitous humanitarian situation in Gaza. We offer our deepest condolences to the affected families and all of Gaza and the West Bank. We also extend our condolences to the families and colleagues of humanitarian workers who have lost their lives in the line of duty, including the 38 UN staff members who have perished recently in Gaza. Kenya thanks the United Nations, the Secretary General in particular, Egypt, Jordan, and other parties for the opening of the Rafah border crossing, but it is inadequate. It is imperative that Israel and neighboring states unite to guarantee unhindered humanitarian aid and delivery of vital services at the scale needed. We call for Israel's military to take every precaution to protect civilians and critical civilian infrastructure from its military strikes. We strongly condemn Hamas's tactic of hiding weapons in civilian areas. Using human shields is abhorrent and illegal. These actions violate the fundamental values and laws upheld by the UN, highlighting the urgent need for a global resolution to the Palestinian question. Mr. President, history teaches us that the response of states to terrorism, particularly when they make use of illegal means, can unintentionally lead us to an era of escalated radicalization and violence. Much has been said about the 7th October attacks being Israel's 9/11. All of us can empathize with the desire for vengeance after the cruelties of terrorism have been visited on the innocent. Yet we must be wise enough to remember the terribly costly lessons learned from the worldwide responses to the Al-Qaeda attacks here in New York 2 decades ago. We therefore strongly urge Israel to adhere to international humanitarian law and the laws of war today so that it can maintain the legitimate opportunity to negotiate peace tomorrow. The desire of the Palestinian people for their own land can never be extinguished. However, as long as Palestinians grow up in rage because their lives, dignity, and talents are distorted by a punishing occupation, their just cause will struggle to be led by a legitimate resistance that rejects terrorism. The attacks of 7th October and the aftermath in Gaza signal a pivotal moment. The status quo is no more. 2 paths lie ahead: an escalating conflict with global repercussions or a renewed international commitment to a 2-state solution and peaceful coexistence based on a credible, nonpartisan, and impartial process. This is the moment for courageous, inspired leadership that can keep its eye on the prospect for peace. Such leadership must desist from using the grave situation in Gaza to advance short-term geostrategic advantage or mobilize domestic constituencies, for to do so constitutes a betrayal to the Palestinian cause and an insult to Israeli and Palestinian lives lost. States that ardently support and sponsor both factions of this monumental conflict bear the responsibility to employ their influence and leverage in guiding the parties back to the negotiating table. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As was expressed by the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia yesterday, Colombia reaffirms its historic support for a peaceful solution